Good evening. It is Wednesday night. We're having to change things up just a little bit because of our weather conditions. So tonight everybody is joining us online. We are trying to stream this out through all of our different means. So hopefully whether you're watching on a television or you've got your phone at our website, or if you're watching us on Facebook through a television or a computer or something like that, you've got the opportunity to join us. We hope and pray that everyone is safe. That's, of course, our most important concern tonight with these storms that have been coming through. We have been alerted to some really severe weather that's to the south of us, and we hope that it avoids us here. But wherever you are tonight, please be careful and be paying attention to that. But we're glad that you could join us tonight. And again, we're thankful for technology that lets us get together and record things and put it out online so that we can keep this series going. The series from Ecclesiastes that is presented by the Freed-Hardeman Lectureship Committee and the lessons that they've been doing. This is our third in the series. So tonight we're going to be in Ecclesiastes Chapter 3. The video's been up online for the past week by Dr. Blackwelder. Hopefully you've had the chance to participate and view that, so you already know some of the thoughts on that, but our goal is to provide some interaction with that, some discussion, and so we've picked each week a couple of different people to come join us. Tonight, it's Rogers Kimbrell.
Nice being here.
That's right, and it's interesting. I had mentioned, from the get-go that we would have a panel of usually 3 people, but I got to thinking tonight, I think you and I can probably fill up 45 minutes, no problem. We don't need a third person up here with us, do we?
Probably not.
Probably not. So, you were the first, one of the first people to come up and ask or to volunteer to be on one of the panel discussions. Unlike most other people who just came up and said, "Yeah, I'll be willing to do that," you came up and said,
I want Ecclesiastes Chapter 3.
That's exactly right. You specified which particular lesson you wanted to be a part of, and it did. It fell right in line with what we were doing, so here we are tonight. So I know that you have some thoughts, on a lot of this material. You've shared a little bit of them with me, and I'm excited about us being able to do that. But before you and I start discussing, I did want us to begin with the introduction to the lesson. Again, you can find the full video on our Petersville Church of Christ streaming website. This is lesson number 3, but we'll show a couple of snippets on it later on, all through the lesson tonight. So here is Dr. Doug Burleson, who is introducing the speakers each week, and his introduction, a little bit of information about Dr. Blackwelder, and then the introduction, a couple of ideas from him to get us going, thinking about the importance of time tonight. So that's what I'm looking forward to us doing for the next few minutes now. So let's start with the video.
Thank you for joining us for this study of the book of Ecclesiastes as a part of our 2021 lectureship at Freed-Hardeman University. We're studying Encountering Ecclesiastes, Finding Meaning in the Meaningless World. And in this session, Dr. Mark Blackwelder, Dean of the College of Biblical Studies at Freed-Hardeman University, and one of the preachers at the Estes Church of Christ in Henderson, Tennessee, will be delivering our lesson on the theme, Encountering Time, Finding Meaning in the Moment, from Ecclesiastes Chapter 3, verses 1 through 8.
One of the most popular and well-known verses in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. Its popularity was extended to the popular world in 1965 when the Byrds released their hit song, Turn, Turn, Turn. I'll spare you my rendition of that song today. But it became an anthem of sorts for a period in history when many things in society were in turmoil. And people, especially young people, were looking for meaning, trying to make sense of what they were experiencing. In many respects, that's very much like what was going on in the world of the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon was going through something very, very much like that, trying to decide what life was about and how he ought to think about the things that he was experiencing, trying to make sense of his world. For that reason, the book of Ecclesiastes is relevant in every generation, because there has never been a generation of people who did not try to sort out what they were supposed to think about the events that they were experiencing.
So I think he makes a good point when he opens up and he says the reason that Ecclesiastes still resonates with us is because Solomon is struggling to find meaning in his life because of something that's going on with him. And I don't know what that would be. I don't know what circumstances there were going on in Solomon's life. But he says every generation that comes faces faces some type of circumstance or situation that causes them to have the same questions. What is the meaning of all this? What is the purpose? Is there meaning in anything that's going on? And I thought it was kind of neat that he made that reference to the song, that came out in '65, to everything there's a season. And he talks about there's a time for war and a time for peace. And that song says, it's not too late, for peace. I would imagine, since you were around in 1965, you probably know what the circumstances were that was causing young people to wonder questions like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which war was that in the 60s?
In the 60s was the Vietnam.
That's what I'm thinking. It's probably the Vietnam War, and a lot of people were questioning meaning and things like that. But we all, whether it's a period of war or other circumstances, I put this question up here, and this is, kind of, I'm springing this one on you, but what are some of those situations that we face today that cause us to sit back? Do you think of anything that makes us, or that's had made you in your life sit back and ask that big, the big question, why are we here, or, what's the meaning of it all, or anything like that?
Well, it goes back to my childhood when I was 5 years old. My Uncle James fought in World War II.
Yeah.
Went to the Philippines in the Army. And me at 5 years old, I couldn't understand why my uncle had to leave Jasper, Alabama and go fight for our country. But I realized what the Japanese did to us. And there was a time to kill, because if we didn't, Japan and Germany would take over America.
Right.
And we wouldn't be a democratic society right now.
The country that we enjoy living in today would not exist. So
we fought for that freedom, and I appreciate all the veterans that did this.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got, today there's a whole lot of turmoil and upheaval. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it feels like, because of how much craziness is going on around us right now, that people are starting to ask those same questions, whether it's the riots and the protests, or whether it's, disagreement with the government, or whether it's, all these different movements and things that are happening. It feels to me like a lot of people are questioning, and that's supposed to be the perfect opportunity for us to step in as Christians and be able to say, look, there is an answer to your questions. Mm-hmm. These things that you're wondering, there is a solution for them. And a lot of times people don't seek those answers until they get into this kind of turmoil, into this mess. And sometimes it's personal. Maybe it's just me personally. I go through something difficult in my life, and I start asking questions. Or maybe it's a global pandemic like COVID-19, and everybody starts thinking, wait a minute, what's going on in the world, and what is this all about? So I'm hoping that Ecclesiastes can help us get out there with some people and let them see that there is some order to the chaos, And that's, I think, kind of what this section, verses 1 through 8 of chapter 3, kind of do for us, is talk about, look, there is a big picture. In the big picture, to everything, there is a season, right? To everything, there is a time, there is a purpose for all of these things that happen under heaven. And I think Mark Blackwelder did a pretty good job of bringing those things out. You had a comment, I know, on verse 2 in particular, a time to be born and a time to die, right?
Well, I thought about the most important time to be born in my life. It was on July the 20th, 1951.
Okay.
That's when I was born again as a Christian.
Right.
And I had to die to self
That's it.
when I was 12 years old. And when Bessel Barrett Baxter baptized me at Annapolis Avenue Church of Christ, I was 12 years old. And that was the most important birth date in my life.
Right.
I mean, I was born on the 28th of December, 1939, and that makes me an 81-year-old.
Whew.
And I've seen a lot of changes in my life.
Yeah.
But the most important change in anybody's life would be the time that they die to self and are baptized into Christ.
That's exactly right. And like you said, I find that fascinating that it is first a death and then a new life and then a new birth. You know, and so verse 2 could very easily apply to becoming a Christian because you have to die so that you can live. You know, and that is significant. That is the most important thing. But you even brought it up. I had it, you know, I put it up on the screen for, you know, for folks. But what has life taught you about the value, the importance of time? You know, you say 81 years. You know, I'm hoping I'll make it to 81 years. I don't know. I don't know. But if I would imagine when I get to that point in time that I will have a significant amount of experience to draw from that I don't have right now. And that changes how you see things, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
And I've got two brothers that were younger than me that died, one this past year,
Right.
and then one 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And their lifestyle caused that early death. And they thought I was a fanatic on health things. But I said, you know what? If I can keep my cholesterol down, I won't be going in the hospital and having bypass surgery and weigh 300 pounds.
Right.
Like my...
It's hard to imagine you would have a brother that would be, you know, that size.
Yeah.
But because of different lifestyle choices.
And I told him, I said, you know, sausage is fine to go with your biscuit, but you don't need it 7 days a week. And so since I had a high cholesterol, I was determined to keep mine down.
Really. And so making lifestyle changes is what helped you
Exactly.
with that. That's
Be
exactly
81,
right.
yep.
And so you learn to appreciate those things. If you want to have more time, then you've got to make some choices to make that happen. You know, if you want to appreciate that.
And I look back, and really they were selfish and wanted to do what they wanted to do, not consider their wives and their kids and grandchildren.
Maybe how it affects their family. That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. Well, this lesson talks about time, but then Mark Blackwelder did something that kind of caught me off guard. He starts off by asking the question, you know, what even is time? You know, he begins with this section, what is the meaning of time? And I hadn't really thought about that before, but Ecclesiastes 3, depending on your translation, says there's a time for all of these things to happen. And then he goes through and kind of explains a little bit what that, what he means by that, or what maybe Solomon means by that. And I thought that was worth going over for just a minute, because usually we think about time, especially here in America, as being a specific moment in history, right? At 4:30, you know, this video is supposed to go out at 6:30, and you know, there's probably going to be some people, if we don't get it up at 6:32, you know, the time is going to be wrong, you know, and so they're going to be concerned. And so we think about it as this specific moment in history. And he says, you know, that's not really what we talk about. He uses that example of your winter clothes. You know, he says, I've got, in my closet, I've got summer clothes and winter clothes. And I'm wearing my sweater today because I feel like it's, the time is drawing near where I won't be wearing sweaters anymore,
Right.
you know, because this is my winter weather. But that doesn't mean that if in early November it gets, you know, really, really cold, I'm not allowed to wear winter clothes because it's not technically winter yet, winter time. What he says is, you know, the meaning of time is this happening at a particular moment, and more specifically at the appropriate moment. And I thought that was a pretty important idea. You know, we use the phrase, don't waste your time, you know.
And on that note about time, usually on Easter Sunday, the women wore white high-heel shoes.
That's right.
Well, we went to Poplar Street Church of Christ in '62. It was snow on the ground on Easter. Buttercups were coming up through the snow, and Joanne wore her white high-heel shoes
Oh
to
my
church
goodness, in
at
the
Poplar
snow.
Street in the snow.
Right.
Because it was time to wear them.
Because it's time to wear high. That's exactly right. Autumn and I were talking about that just the other day. I was trying to buy a new shirt to wear with a suit, and I was all confused about what was appropriate and when was acceptable time to wear these things. And wearing white, before Labor Day used to be the rule. That was anathema. You were not allowed to do that because it wasn't the time, Not that the clock said or the calendar said, white, wear white, but that was just the accepted at time. But Autumn says that's out the window now. She says you can do whatever you want nowadays. So I don't know how to keep track of that.
You couldn't go barefoot until the first day of May. That was the time.
The barefoot, that's right. That's when. But for a lot of us country folks, we were looking forward to that.
Exactly.
No, not wearing those shoes during the summertime. That makes a lot of difference. But I think that helps me when I read here in Ecclesiastes. There is an appropriateness. There is a moment when these things matter and that kind of stuff. So the meaning of time and how we look at time really becomes significant. Mark had a question, a comment, talking about how we see time, how we see eternity. And he wonders, how does that influence Solomon's struggle to find meaning in life? And as it talks about, in Ecclesiastes 2, and then in other places in Ecclesiastes, how he sees time, life under the sun. And I think that that's important for us to remember. That phrase, under the sun, for Solomon means living life without a spiritual perspective. Mm-hmm. Life under the sun is just what we see here and now, what we're stuck with day to day. And if we don't have a spiritual perspective, then time becomes has a different meaning. It has a different sense of meaning. Autumn and I were watching this TV show, and there was a character on there who was, I believe he was a Buddhist. Whichever it was that one of those Eastern religions that believes in reincarnation. And he was making these decisions in his life, and they were going poorly and badly, and he kept saying, I must have done something really bad in a past life, and I'm being punished now. And then he said something to the effect of, he was just going to go ahead and do whatever he wanted to do. Talking about being selfish earlier. He was just going to go ahead and break the law. He was going to go ahead and not care about consequences. He was going to go ahead and do what he thought he wanted to do because he said, I'll do better in my next life. He said, I'll do better in my next life. So the way that we see time can affect the choices that we make. He thought, whatever I do in this life doesn't really matter because once I die, I'm going to be reincarnated as something else, and I'll get another chance at it. So I might as well go ahead and live however I want to right now. But I don't believe that.
I don't either.
So because I don't believe that, I'm not going to go out there and live that kind of life. I'm not going to make those same choices.
Because when we live again, it's either going to be in heaven or hell.
That's right. It's appointed unto man what? Once
to die.
That's right. And after that, the judgment. That's exactly right. That's what Hebrews says. And so our goal is to live this life with eternity in mind. And so, for Solomon, I think it goes back to that life under the sun. If you don't have a spiritual perspective, then, as it says in this book a couple of times, you might as well eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Yeah. You might as well enjoy these moments as precious. And I know some people who don't believe in God, and this is how their perspective is. Their perspective is, I'm going to squeeze every drop of pleasure and every drop of enjoyment and joy out of this life as I can, because once I'm gone, I'm gone forever, which maybe they appreciate those moments that they get, but they also miss out on the opportunity to prepare for an eternal life, which is a pretty big problem. But that struggle that all of us have to go through, part of it depends on, how do I see time? How do I view these moments that are passing? I can't go back in time, but how I use this moment and how I use these days will affect eternity.
Exactly.
Which I think is really important. Now, I wanted to spend a minute, because he does bring this up, on this idea of fate. He talks about, for some people reading Ecclesiastes chapter 3, to everything there is a season, and there is a time for every matter under heaven. There is a purpose, a time for every purpose. And so some people read this passage and they get into predestination, They get into what's called determinism. They get into fate, that you can't affect the outcome of days. You can't change things, because if there's a time for it to happen, then nothing you can do is going to change it. And if there's a time for this to happen, and so he talks about, is this saying that it's all inevitable? Is it saying that there's no point in trying to influence the events because you can't do anything to change them anyway? Now he says he doesn't think that's the case. He doesn't believe in that. He uses the example of Hezekiah, when Hezekiah was sick to the point of death. And Isaiah is sent to Hezekiah there in Isaiah chapter 38. And Isaiah says, God has told me that you're going to die. God has told me you need to get your house in order. You need to get ready because there's nothing to change. But the Bible says Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and he prayed and he wept and he beseeched God. And before Isaiah even got outside of the castle, of the palace, in the courtyard there, God came to Isaiah and said, you know what? I'm going to give Hezekiah 15 more years of life. And Hezekiah had the ability to influence, God's decision there. Abraham had a conversation with God about Sodom and Gomorrah. It didn't ultimately change things, but God was willing to change his outcome based on, the conversation that he had with Abraham. So I think that there's a good example there to kind of remind us. The Bible isn't saying here in Ecclesiastes that it is determined that these exact things are going to happen like dominoes falling, and you can't do anything about them. Because God has the ability to change anything at any time. And we never know how our behavior will impact that or influence that.
Exactly.
I didn't know if you had anything before I'd gotten into that or about that.
Well, I was thinking about verse 3.
Yeah?
Verse 3, a time to kill, a time to heal.
Yeah.
Who came to my mind was Charles Manson. Charles Manson was responsible for 8 people dying.
Yeah.
And so he
convinced other people to commit those crimes.
Well, it was 8. He got 8 people murdered. He didn't do it, but he got
Right.
8 people murdered.
But he got so...
And so, I believe in capital punishment. Right. And I think the Bible teaches that in the book of Romans, chapter 13.
Okay.
In verse 3, it says, for rulers are not a terror of the good works, but the evil. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you to good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he's God's minister to avenge or execute wrath on the man who practices evil. Well, see, back then, the California law, they could put him to death. But the California people voted to get rid of the death penalty.
Repeal the death penalty.
So they put him in prison for 46 years. And he died on November the 19th, 2017 of colon cancer. So the state of California put him up for 46 years, fed and clothed him. And a lot of them in prison now to even get education.
Right.
And so that's this time to kill and time to heal. If they'd have killed him, this wouldn't have happened 46 years of putting the prisoner up.
And whether he was, the fact that he was deserving of death, according to Romans, chapter 13, seems pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And so I know that a lot of times this discussion around Ecclesiastes chapter 3 centers around things like capital punishment or abortion or things like that.
Yeah.
Because it does. It addresses those big issues, and we have to look at those things, because like you say, the Bible does seem to indicate that there are times when it's appropriate to do that. And how we go about that, I think that we can say fairly that there was a time in the past when maybe it was not equitable, it wasn't distributed fairly, that some people were more likely to be found guilty and put to death than other people. But with the amount of appeals that we have in place today, and the process, hopefully, that the justice system goes through in our country, to help make sure that a person truly is guilty and unrepentant and guilty of something so heinous that they cannot be rehabilitated, that capital punishment is an appropriate response.
And see, as far as punishment goes, I believe in Proverbs 13:24, spare the rod and spoil the child.
Right?
In 1964, I heard this term, time out,
Right?
with my granddaughter. And I thought, what is time out? So they go in a corner.
Yep.
They don't get punished like we was punished. And I don't think that time out's worked with our generation.
There's an awful lot of debate between what are effective discipline methods. And I have learned through the years, I think, that there are techniques that I would have thought were never worth trying that I see other parents have success with. And sometimes it is a matter of kids are different, and something that works with one child will not work with another child.
And what worked with Katrina didn't work with Mike.
Well, and that's it. Even in your own household, the same punishment doesn't work. And we learned, I think Alderman and I learned that lesson too late, because we just tried to apply the same punishments and they didn't have the same effect. And some of them, they weren't instructive. The point of a discipline is not just to hurt your kids. Nobody wants to hurt their children.
No.
The point is to teach them. It's supposed to be a learning opportunity. And unfortunately, because we did it the wrong way, it was received not as a learning. They didn't learn anything from it. They just were upset by what happened. And so we do have to find that balance.
Yep.
Well, he has a section where he kind of gets into how we should read this section. And I thought that was pretty good. So I wanted to show just about a 2-minute video clip as he gets rolling with each one of these ideas, which, of course, tonight we don't have time to look at each one of these individually, but just to notice them. And he does the same thing. So let's notice this video clip and see. I lied to you. I want to do this now. Here we go. All right.
Now, as we begin this, I'm going to ask your benevolence as I take some liberties with the text. And here's what I mean. The text itself says, "For everything there is a season," verse 1, "and a time for every matter under heaven." Now, the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying things happen in an orderly way, generally speaking. And I don't disagree with that statement, obviously, though even in Solomon's mind, that doesn't necessarily mean everything that we experience is obvious and orderly. But nonetheless, the statement is a true statement. From there on, we read in most of our English translations something like this: a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what's planted, etc. Here's the part where I need your indulgence. Can I suggest that for our time today, that we capture that with this wording: sometimes people are born, and sometimes they die. Sometimes you plant, and sometimes you pluck up what's planted. I think in some respects this captures what Solomon in Ecclesiastes is trying to say about the order in our world. He's not saying there is a specific chronological moment for each of these activities. He's saying these things happen, and we can watch these things happen and unfold. And we can learn something about how our world works, and, spoiler alert, something about how our God works within our world. So let's take a look at this catalog of times and understand something about each of these.
He calls it the catalog of times. And again, you could do a discussion about each one of these, verses individually. But he talks about, and I like the phrasing, sometimes we're born and sometimes we die. This is the cycle of life. This is the way that the world works. And in the big scheme of things, it has balance. There are things that are positive. There are things that are negative. I think that one thing that's important to note here, you correct me if you don't agree with this, I don't think that Solomon is prescribing whether these are good things or bad things. I think he's just describing the way the world works. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's saying that that being born is good and dying is bad. I think he's saying that there are times when somebody might look at being born as bad. And somebody might look at a time to kill, like you say with Charles Manson, or individuals, or the enemy on the battlefield, or something like that, where that could be a good thing. So he's not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. He's just saying, look, we have these positive experiences, these negative experiences, and into our lives, they come. And he talks about the hospital. I thought this was a good observation. You can go to the hospital and you can see both ends of these things happening. On one floor, there's someone who's
dying in palliative care.
In palliative care, and they're on the ventilator, and it won't be long before they pass away. And then you go down one flight of stairs, and you're at the maternity ward.
They play some music.
And they're playing music because a new life has been brought into the world. And so a hospital is one of those places where you're confronted with the stark ends of the spectrum, like what he talks about. But he says, sometimes we plant, sometimes we pluck up what's planted. Sometimes we weep, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we mourn, sometimes we dance. There's a time to cast stones away, and there's a time when we should be gathering stones together. I did like his commentary on that just real quickly, summarize it in a sentence. Casting stones away is when you're preparing the garden, when you're getting ready to till the ground, and you need to get those big rocks and those big stones out of the way. But then later on, there's a time when you need to gather those stones up. And he talks about, in the ancient world, they would use those stones that they had cast out of the ground to build the wall around their garden, or to protect, or to keep maybe the animals in the pen or something like that. So I thought that was a pretty good explanation. And kind of all these things kind of go through that section. When you read through those 8 verses, he had a question. Is there one of those that's more challenging to you, or is there one of them that really jumps out at you that's like, that's kind of a big deal,
The one that jumped out to me was a time to mourn and a time to dance.
Yeah.
Miriam rose up on the other side after they crossed the sea, and she danced and played her tambourine.
That's true.
And then when the young man left home, and when he was gone and he come back to the house.
In Luke chapter 15.
He heard singing and dancing.
The sound of dancing.
And so he said, what are they doing in there? Well, he didn't like that, but they were dancing. He was dancing because he was happy that lost child come back home.
Right, right.
So, I'm not saying go out here.
The type of dancing.
Yeah.
The type of dancing might be different, but David, expressed his joy at the Ark of the Covenant coming into Jerusalem with dancing. Jesus and John the Baptist were so different from each other. And Jesus, he pointed out how hypocritical the Pharisees and the scribes were. He said, you guys looked at John the Baptist and how serious he was, and you made fun of him because he was so serious, and he never went out and partied with anybody or things like that. And then you look at me and you call me a glutton and a drunkard because I do associate with people that you say, that we shouldn't associate with. So it's like you're playing this tune on the flute and we won't dance for you. He uses that phrasing. It's like, there's a appropriate place to express that joy, and that's something that...
and I've seen 1- and 2-year-olds sitting in those pews dancing
right. Hopping
songs
around, right.
And there's nothing wrong with Christians being happy.
Yep.
And showing it.
I think that's true. The last little section is where I think he really gets into the conclusion of the matter. And I think I'm all the way over in my notes. It doesn't happen until page 41. But he calls it the divine commentary. He says, to try and understand the significance of verses 2 through 8 and how this big picture works, he says it's really important for us to look at what the Bible says about this material. And so then, he says that commentary comes in verses 9 through 15. He says, what gain has the worker for his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live, and also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it or taken away from it. When God has done it, people fear before him. That which is has already been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away, or what has been pursued. And so he talks about time here. He says everything is beautiful in its time. When it's appropriate for it, when it's the right time for something, then, a proverb says a word fitly spoken, is like apples of gold and settings of silver, But if you a fool opens his mouth at the wrong time, and makes a mess of things.
In verse 8, it says a time to keep silent, time to speak. I've been reminded a lot of times, Rogers, you got one mouth and two ears. And so if we'll listen twice as much
as we talk,
we'll learn.
That's a good point. I've been told that same thing myself. I wonder why they single us out for that kind of advice.
Because we're always learning our mouths.
James, doesn't it tell us, is James chapter 1, let every man be swift to hear
and
slow to speak. That's
and
true.
that tongue is in a slippery place.
It's true. It just slips right out.
Yeah.
And the things that we say. But I appreciate, he talks about time in verse 11 and eternity. He says there is a time for things to happen, and that's beautiful. But then we also have this sense of eternity that is bigger, that does tell us there is more to life than just what's here under the sun. Now, as I wanted to point out, just to kind of summarize how Mark Blackwelder covers this section, he pulls three observations from this commentary on Solomon's wisdom here. The first thing is there is beauty in things happening according to their time. It's beautiful when we do our work and we're rewarded for our labor. A good, hard day's work, we should take pride in that. That is a beautiful thing. That's what he says in those verses.
And we'll sign our name to it.
And you should be able to put your name on your work and be proud of what you've done. That's exactly right. That is a beautiful thing. In its function is the way he puts it. Beauty is comparable not to something physically lovely, but something that is serving its function, like how a designer might see a chair, or how a football fan might see an offense that is flawlessly running its plays. When it's doing what it's supposed to do, it is beautiful. The second thing that he talks about there is that eternity. Something transcends. Something goes beyond what we see happening in time around us. No matter how much verses 2 through 8 reoccur, how many people are born and how many people die, no matter how many planting seasons there are and harvesting, time to plant, time to tear up, no matter how often that happens, he says, we also have this something in us that compels us to look beyond, to look bigger, and to transcend that. And then the third thing that he talks about is there is someone bigger than us at work. And so that's going to be kind of where we finish up with this last video segment that we watched. But before we did that, I wondered if you had any thoughts about that or anything else kind of that we talked about with the importance of time tonight.
Well, I've got a list here of 21 rules for good old age. I'm not going to let us all
21 rules for old age, okay?
But one of these stuck out. This one I want to read. If you've been offended by others, forgive them. It'd be time to forgive them right then, because if you're offended in someone, you apologize. Don't drag resentment around with you. It will make you sad and bitter. It doesn't matter who was right. Someone once said, holding a grudge is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. Forgive and move on with your life. So there's a time, just go ahead and forgive and forget, because you're not going to hurt that person by holding a grudge. You're going to hurt yourself.
You're just hurting yourself.
So it's time to do that. When someone offends you, make up with them.
That's true. Don't waste time.
Don't
that's
waste
what we
time.
talk about. That is a waste of time and energy. I think that's an excellent point. I think that it's great how Ecclesiastes takes these big picture things and it applies so specifically, to our life and these individual things and the choices that we make. And so, studying chapter 3 lets us see how we need to live day to day and how these things are going to come and go. And there's sometimes this happens and sometimes this happens, and we accept them. We need to learn to accept them. But then at the end of the day, we also need to look beyond. We need to look bigger than that. And so I think that helps us. This helps us to do that more in our own lives. And I appreciate it. I think we've had a good discussion. I appreciate you volunteering and the thoughts that you shared, and it gives us a chance to think about them. And I don't know what thoughts you guys would have had to contribute or to add to that, but I certainly hope that you'll be thinking about and interacting with these questions in the same way. Next week, we'll turn our attention over into chapter 4 a little bit, and our panel hopefully will consist of one of our elders, Terry Oakley, and then one of the smartest women that I know, my wife, Autumn Richardson. And I'm not saying she's smart because she's my wife, but it doesn't hurt.
But she's second smartest because Joanne's smart.
Well, I guess we'll have to argue about that after the video is over, after this recording. But I think our class has gone really well tonight. I'm looking forward to us being together next week. I pray that you'll be safe tonight through these storms that come through, and that you will take these lessons and ideas to heart. But we'll finish up with a video, just the conclusion of Mark Blackwelder's lesson, that hopefully will help put a cap on our time together tonight. And we'll look forward to seeing you the next time that we gather together. So let's finish with this last video clip.
The third observation we'll make is that there is something, or perhaps better said, someone bigger at work here. We read in verse 14 that God is at work. Human activity here is set against God's activity. The effort that Solomon makes as he works his way through this book describes his frustration as a human being trying to figure out how life makes sense. In verse 14, he reveals that he is at least aware of the fact that God is at work and that everything cannot be fully understood, much to his frustration sometimes, but nonetheless, this realization. I'm a gearhead. I grew up working on cars. I remember the first car I bought I was 14 years old. It wasn't running. We brought it home, my dad and I, we worked on it. I'll still remember the first time we got that thing to start, the very first pop, when that motor ignited that spark. Now, somebody without the background or understanding of how internal combustion engines work might say, oh no, there was an explosion inside the cylinder. But the truth is, what happened at that moment was exactly what was supposed to happen. The engine won't run without it. And the one who designed that engine was expecting that to happen. And not only was he expecting it to happen that one time, he was expecting it to happen over and over and over again in a controlled way that ultimately resulted in the engine running smoothly, the car moving forward, and all of the events and circumstances connected with the journey being exactly what they should. This is something that, whether he fully realized it or not, by inspiration he points to. God sees the big picture. He recognizes the ultimate end of all things, verse 15. He is ensuring that things move forward as they should, despite our limited vision of this. This should prompt us to recognize our weakness and His power. The ordered world, pictured in verses 2 through 8, is not only not random, it's not unattended. God is at work. Aware of the activity of God, man has a hope that helps see him through these moments of unknown and uncertainty. God can use all of this for His glory and our good. We cannot see this due to our limited, time-bound perspective. That makes it no less real, no less true. Anchoring our hope in the certain things of God instead of the uncertain things of this world is a challenge for Solomon and for us. Thanks to the New Testament, we're much more aware of the big picture than was the preacher of Ecclesiastes. Praise be to a God who is bigger than us, one that we cannot fully understand, but who has made everything beautiful in its time.
What